In 2015, a modern European nation came within days of complete financial collapse. Banks shut their doors, cash withdrawals were limited, pensions were frozen, and the country that once gave the world democracy, philosophy, and even money itself was now negotiating its survival with international creditors. This wasn't a scene from a history book. It was real. That country was Greece, a member of the European Union, part of the Eurozone, using one of the world's most stable currencies. And yet, like an empire in its final days, it stood on the edge of ruin. How did this happen? How could a country sharing the same currency as Germany and France, backed by powerful institutions, find itself begging for rescue after rescue? And why should this matter to you, even if you've never set foot in Athens? Because what happened in Greece wasn't just a local tragedy. It was a modern lesson in how the global financial system truly works, how debt can become a political weapon, and how quickly sovereignty disappears when the money runs out. The seeds of the crisis were planted long before the headlines. When Greece joined the euro in 2001, it gained access to cheap borrowing like never before. For decades, Greece had been known for high debt and chronic budget deficits. But with the euro, investors assumed the risk was shared. They believed Greek bonds were as safe as German ones. And suddenly, Greece could borrow at historically low interest rates. And borrow it did. Public spending exploded. New highways, airports, and infrastructure projects sprang up. Public sector salaries swelled, but only part of the money fueled real development. The rest disappeared into a bloated bureaucracy and an inefficient tax system. Corruption and tax evasion became everyday habits. The government's revenues lagged far behind its expenses, and beneath the illusion of a European dream, debt kept quietly piling up. By 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, Greece already had one of the largest deficits in the Eurozone. The collapse of Lehman Brothers made investors more cautious about government debt, and when they examined Greece, the numbers didn't add up. In 2009, it was revealed that Greece had been understating its deficit for years. The real figure was close to 15% of GDP, far beyond what EU rules allowed. Confidence vanished overnight. Interest rates skyrocketed. Greece was shut out of the bond markets entirely. By 2010, the country had no choice but to request a bailout from the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. But no bailout comes without a price. The first rescue package, worth 110 billion euros, demanded harsh austerity, deep spending cuts, tax hikes, pension reforms, and sweeping labor market changes. On paper, these were meant to reduce the deficit and restore investor confidence. In reality, they plunged Greece into an even deeper recession. GDP shrank, unemployment soared, surpassing 27% by 2013. Youth unemployment hit 60%. Public services collapsed, and the cruel irony, debt, the very thing these bailouts were supposed to fix, only grew worse. Because here's the truth no one wanted to say out loud. When an economy contracts, even if you repay debt, your debt ratio still rises. By 2012, Greece needed a second bailout, 130 billion euros, along with a haircut on private bonds, a partial default in all but name. Yet the burden didn't ease. Every new package brought more austerity, less growth, and deeper despair. By 2015, under the left-wing Syriza government, Greece held a referendum. The people voted no to the creditors' harsh terms. But just days later, the government signed an even tougher deal, because the alternative, leaving the euro, returning to the drachma, and declaring full default, would have meant economic catastrophe in the short term. At that moment, Greece was no longer truly independent. Its budget, taxes, and pension policies were dictated by the Troika, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF. In the 2015 referendum, the Greek people had said no, but just days later, the government was forced to accept an even harsher deal. Why? Because the alternative was far worse, leaving the euro, returning to the drachma, and declaring full default, a short-term economic catastrophe. From that moment, Greece, at least economically, was no longer independent. Its budgets, taxes, and public spending were no longer decided in Athens, but by the Troika, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF. This story wasn't unique to Greece. The mechanism was ancient. Debt has always been a tool of power, a weapon of diplomacy, a form of occupation without armies. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire met the same fate. After repeated defaults, European creditors created the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, taking control of the empire's customs revenues. Taxes once meant for the state were redirected to the creditors. The same pattern unfolded in Egypt during the 1870s. After borrowing heavily to build railways and expand the Suez Canal, Egypt defaulted, and Britain and France stepped in, not just as lenders but as managers. Financial control became political control. On paper, the state still existed, Flags waved, leaders spoke, but real power belonged to the creditors. And that's exactly what Greece experienced in the 2010s. Not a loss of territory, but of control. Not a military invasion, but a financial trusteeship. The Troika became an invisible, shadow government, deciding what could be spent, which pensions to cut, and how quickly debts must be repaid. For ordinary Greeks, this era was devastating. Pensions were slashed again and again. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Thousands of small businesses shut down. The social fabric unraveled. And after all that suffering, the debt barely shrank. Even today, Greece's debt-to-GDP ratio sits above 160%. The economy has stabilized, but at a much lower level. The cost of survival was a lost decade. Why does this story still matter? Because the same forces that crushed Greece are still at work. Today, countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Argentina face the same equation: crushing debt, IMF programs, and the painful trade-off between austerity and sovereignty. The names change, but the structure remains. Easy borrowing in good times, panic during crises, and dependency when the money runs out. Even developed nations aren't immune. Italy carries one of the highest debt ratios in the Eurozone. Japan's public debt exceeds 250% of GDP. And even the United States, with the privilege of issuing the world's reserve currency, now carries more than $34 trillion in debt. The difference is simple. Big economies can delay the reckoning, but delay is not immunity. And that's where the real lesson lies. Greece's crisis wasn't just about numbers. It was about the loss of flexibility. When a nation can't print its own currency, can't devalue, and can't function without external finance, it's no longer in control. Policy space shrinks, choices fade. That's the danger for every country. Debt feels harmless when times are good. It's invisible, cheap, almost painless. But when confidence disappears, the cost explodes, and creditors stop being partners. They become decision makers. The same is true for individuals. Debt limits freedom. It narrows choices. It binds you to someone else's system. Whether it's a household budget or a national one, the more you depend on borrowed money, the less control you have when the world changes. Greece's fall wasn't a conquest in the ancient sense. No armies came, no walls were breached. But in practice, it was a surrender of sovereignty, and it happened in one of the world's most developed regions, under the supervision of institutions meant to prevent exactly such collapses. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And when a modern democracy bows under the weight of debt, we're reminded just how fragile financial freedom really is. If what I've shared today helped you see the world from a different perspective, don't forget to subscribe, because history always has an answer. You just need to look from the right angle, and I'm here to help you find those answers, buried in the dusty pages of financial history.